Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python. Actually, that's not true. We have done 52 weeks of Python and we've completed all 52 weeks. And the purpose of this lesson is just to review what we have talked about. When you think about it, we've come an amazingly long way. We've come from just trying to learn a little bit about Python to being able to do something like this. That's pretty impressive as somebody who's developed software for over 40 years in my life. This is a significant undertaking. You've got your database, you've got messaging, you've got high-level networking type stuff that requires root privileges. You've got a user interface, you've got monitoring, you've got multi-threading, you've got a Flask server. There's a whole lot going on here, and if you've made it this far, then kudos to you, and you deserve a pat on the back. What the purpose of this particular video is going to be is just to remind you about all the stuff that we've covered. I'm calling it 52 weeks of Python in 52 minutes. Obviously, I cannot go over an entire lesson, 45 or 50 minutes worth of stuff in 1 minute, so it's really just a reminder of what it is that we talked about. And so as you go through this, if there's something that you realize, oh, I need to go back through that, you may want to do that. If you haven't gone through it yet and you're just looking to figure out what's in this class, then you can use this time to figure out, okay, well, there's an interesting topic. I need to make sure I do week X or whatever it might be. So yeah, I hope that you have enjoyed the 52 weeks if you've gone through it. If you haven't, I hope you enjoy the various bits and pieces that you pick out. And now, without further ado, let's get started reviewing our 52 weeks in 52 minutes. In week number 1, I introduced you to myself, that I do have a fair amount of experience doing software. I introduced you to Quokka, this project that I built that did monitoring of devices and hosts and services. I introduced you to the idea of having an IDE, which would allow you to write code, and it would tell you when you made a typo. It would help you to be able to run things on your own, to debug them, etc., and the value of having an environment such as that. In week number 2, we talked about the basics of Python. We talked about variables, we talked about strings, we talked about lists and mentioned them, and we mentioned and showed a little bit of dictionaries. We even showed a for loop and a print statement. These are things that we would begin to use in earnest in the next weeks, but basically it was me typing code on an empty scratch pad like this. In week number 3, we began to get the ball rolling doing actual stuff in Python. And so we talked about something like this, these curly braces with a key on one side and a value on the other, which of course is a dictionary. Here I'm modeling a device. We talked about how you could print that out using the Python print statement. We talked about the fact that it doesn't look very good when you print it like that. You kind of need to do something a little bit better, and we showed doing that with pretty print. And then we introduced a for loop, and whoa, look at this. It's not just a for loop iterating through a list. We're actually iterating through a dictionary. In order to do that, we need to use this method items in order to get the key and the value, and we iterated through it and we printed this out. And oh, look at that. We used an F string for the first time. I'm assuming it's the first time, and so the nice thing about this is you can put curly braces and then the value that you want to print out, and you can do nice formatting like this. So we ran this and then we showed how it looks pretty cool when you ended up printing it out. In week number 4, we really got going. Not only did we do a dictionary, but we did a list of dictionaries. Those would be devices that we're emulating. We showed a for loop where we're numerically going through a range of values for every item. We're creating a dictionary, and look at this, we're using choice in order to generate random names, vendors, OS, etc. for our device. In order to do this, we needed to import choice from random. We're also importing string, which gives us some capabilities. Tabulate to print some of the data, operator to sort it, pretty print again as we did before to print it out. We're basically going through printing them out as we go. Then we pretty print, and then we print with tabulate, and here's the results of it. You can see everything printed out nicely, and eventually a nice little table that shows the tabulated and sorted data. In week number 5, we talked about functions. What? Functions already? It's almost like I'm trying to get you to be a software developer instead of somebody who copies and pastes things from various random websites. And that's correct. We're learning how to become software developers. In order to do that, you got to learn how functions work. Here is the code of our program. See that? There's hardly anything to it. We just call create devices. We pass in the number of subnets, number of devices. We give the keywords here so that it knows exactly what they are, although we could have done it positionally. Here is how we define it with these keywords and default values. And then we go through and we do exactly what we did before on the last lesson. We don't need to look back at that. We create random vendors. And if we, random devices with random vendors, random OS, random version, and the IP address that we gave it. And so this is the wonderful output that we get from this small amount of code that you see down here at the bottom. Why? Because we learned how to create functions and we hid all of the details in this function that we're defining here. Oh yeah, and define the function with the def keyword. Week number 6 was on modules and packages. Here's our code. What? Where did all the code go? Well, that's the idea. We moved the code that we didn't really care about that much or that is not of interest to our main program into a separate package and into a separate module. And so if I look at this, the module has create devices in it, and it does basically the create devices stuff. Don't freak out. I've added a whole bunch of stuff to this particular module than it has when you did this lesson. But that is the general idea, is that we hide the details of a particular thing in a package. That's what you're doing when you import things. And so we actually did that ourselves. Wow, it's almost like we're software developers. In week number 7, we talked about strings. Here's some things that we mentioned. You can split your string and end up with a list based on a particular character. Just as an aside, here is something we call function chaining, where you start with something here, you do something to the output of that, then you do something else to the output of that, and that is what that is actually all about. We see a bunch more splits here and different ways to use it. We see that we're actually using split in addition to doing it from a for loop, so that's interesting. We saw actually a list comprehension. We'll talk about that later. We talked about the fact that there is no way to do comparison with ignoring case, so you have to do dot lower in order to do that. You can do finds of particular substrings within a string. We looked at a little bit of screen scraping type stuff where you have output from a device and you have to do things like split lines. And last thing I'll mention is that we looked at slicing strings. That's the basic idea of taking a particular set of characters from a string. You're taking a slice of that string, and that was strings. Week number 8, we talked about printing. We talked about simply printing using the print statement. We talked about organizing the output using pretty print. We talked about going through a loop and printing things out one at a time. We talked about functions that you can use like tabulate, which will allow you to print things in a table. We also have shown how you can sort things. Not going to go into the details, but you can sort the data as well. Talked about using a loop to do a table on your own rather than using tabulate, and using fstring, which is really useful and is a recent introduction in Python and makes your life way, way, way easier. And here we're talking a little bit about sorting in a different manner. We talked about how you can print with 2 different print statements and have it be on the same line by doing this end equals quote, quote. And that was basically it. This other stuff I threw in because I wanted to show how you can take actual network output, but probably not as worthwhile in terms of printing. So we'll look at Nmap later. Week 9 was about comparisons. That's basically if statements, such as comparing to see if the vendor is the same or if the name is the same as another one. We went through and compared against standard versions to see if the devices, the random devices we created, were compliant. Then we went into an important topic called assignment versus copy versus deep copy. Assignment just assigns something to point at the object. Copy copies the first level. Deep copy is what you have to do if you want to copy the entire thing. We did a little SLA, availability and response time, just so that we could do comparisons using less than or greater than. We even have something that does comparison of classes. We haven't talked about object-oriented stuff yet, but this underscore underscore equal underscore underscore is how you implement that. And that is comparisons. In week number 10, we talked about nested data. What do I mean by nested data? Well, here's a picture of nested data. This is a network that I created that has a dictionary of dictionaries of dictionaries of lists of dictionary, a list of dictionary, etc. And so it goes on. And you can create these things in Python. They're very easy to create. I ended up creating an actual function that I call to create that network. And then we can use it however we want. We can iterate through the subnets. We can iterate through the devices within a specific subnet in order to print stuff out. And that is what you can see there. How do you reference a specific item? Well, you reference it just like you normally would. The key here is subnets. And then within that particular thing, here's another key, which would be of the actual subnet. Here's the devices in the devices group, device 0. The name for that device, etc. And I'm actually doing my old assignment versus copy versus deep copy that we saw in the last lesson, in the last week. So that is nested data. In week number 11, we talked about enums and constants. Here's the thing. It's very bad practice to just have string literals throughout your code. If you have code that references stuff like this and then references it again, if you have a typo, it will not get caught as a syntactic error. It hopefully will get caught in execution time when you realize it's not giving you the results that you want. But if you're really unlucky, then you won't even find it until your code is out in the wild. And so using a single spot where you define it and then referring to it by that name is preferable. And so you have multiple options. One is to do constants. One is to create a class that just has these particular fields in it, and you define it and reference it that way all the time. Another way is to use enums, and in your enums you can have it be a numerical value, which maybe saves space, but it's probably more readable if you do something like this where you're actually using the name, so that if you're looking in the debugger or in a log or something like that, it will make sense to you. And this code actually has examples of using string literals and constants and a class and enums by name and enums by value. So that's what this is all about. Week number 12 is about lists versus dictionaries. When do you use a list? When do you use a dictionary? The short answer is if you only have a few items and you don't need to search, you can use a list, but otherwise you should probably want to use a dictionary because otherwise it will take a long time. I wrote some code that creates a network and allows the user to type in something about the device, the IP address of the device to find, and showed the difference in time, which ranged from a few times worse with a list to thousands of times worse with a list. And so you want to use a dictionary if you have something such as this. And lastly, here's a picture of lists versus dictionaries. If I'm looking for 10.0.0.6, I have to go through all of these first before I find it. With a dictionary, I go immediately there. Maybe not so bad in this situation, but if I have 254 times 254 devices, think how long it will take on this side versus over here. I get there immediately. That's the advantage of dictionaries over lists. For week number 13, the topic is debugging. There's not a specific code that has been written for this. I simply show how you can use an IDE such as PyCharm to debug your code by setting breakpoints and by having the debugger come up, and it will pause at the appropriate point, allow you to look at your data, allow you to step through this data. Right here you can see I am creating devices and it takes a very long time for it to complete. And when it does complete, I can look at all the devices that have been created. Here you can see, whoa, that's a lot of different devices that were created for my list versus dictionary. So yeah, you can do this. You can examine the code. You can look at the console to see what it's printed out. And it's just really handy. And it's moving you into a higher echelon of software developer when you know how to debug. Week 14, everything is an object. What does that mean? It means that not only does the piece of data in Python have a value, it also has a reference count, methods that can be used against it, a type, etc. Whereas in other languages, you have primitives that just occupy a location in memory. This becomes important when you begin to think about things which are immutable versus mutable, and you need to understand this specifically if you are intermediate or advanced. Maybe my examples were not too great, I admit that, but probably the one spot where you may want to understand this is when you're calling functions. So that's enough said about that. You will want to know this though when you become more advanced. Week 15, comprehensions. This is where we take something that would normally take a couple of lines and we change it so you can do it in just a single line with these square brackets around it. That means it's a list comprehension. Inside you will see a for loop, and the for loop is going to help to turn something into an actual list. Not only can you do this for loop inside, but also you can have if statements, so you only apply it to certain items. And lastly, over here on the left, you can apply a function to the thing that you are getting before you put it into that list. Not only can you do list comprehensions, you can also do dictionary comprehension. So this is an example of dictionary comprehensions, and I have a couple more. So simple way of changing things. You can agree or disagree whether it's simple, but changing it from multiple lines into doing it in just a single line. Week 16, generators. The basic idea is that when you create a function like this, you can have it be a generator function in which it doesn't return the entire thing, it only returns a piece of it, and then you can use it in a for loop such as this, and every time you call into it or do another iteration, it executes the next line in this generator function. What does a generator function look like? Basically, it's something that does a yield in the middle of it, and this tells Python that right at the moment that it hits this line, it's going to exit what it was doing, and the next time it gets called into, it's going to resume what it was doing. So a little bit different, a little bit counter to what we had done before, but if you're dealing with huge amounts of data, then this can be extremely useful. Week 17, data normalization. What's that all about? That's about making data so that a computer can compare it, such as this, where we see clearly those are the same devices, but because of capitalization, that would be an issue, and the computer would say, no, they're not equal. In simple situations like this, we can say lowercase it and do the comparison. These are trivial to do. Casefold is a new function that I didn't know about that actually does it and works for Unicode and more complex languages. Maybe of more value is something like MAC addresses, where you have all these different formats for representing the MAC address. How do you compare them? One of the ways to compare them is to change them into something which gets rid of all the specialness. So it gets rid of uppercase and removes special characters. And here's a function that does that. For something like IP addresses, we could do something similar to compare these examples, but why do that when there's already functionality available? This IPv4 address class in the IP address package allows us to do comparisons, and it does the normalization for us. That's data normalization. Week 18 is about tuples. What is a tuple? It is basically a list that is immutable. That means it cannot be changed. So it's pretty easy to take something that is a list and change it into a tuple. The only condition is that I can never change that. If I want to make a change, then I need to create a new tuple. You reference items within a tuple in the same way that you do with a list via their subscript, so they're pretty straightforward and easy to use. Why are tuples important? Well, one of the reasons is things that are unchangeable can be used as keys in a dictionary or as items in a set. So it's good to understand that. But basically, pretty straightforward. That's all that tuples are. Week 19, named tuples. Isn't it a pain in the butt to have to refer to your items within your tuple via their subscript all the time? You can't even remember what 0 or 1 or 3 or 4 refer to after a certain amount of time. Wouldn't it be much nicer to be able to say .name or .vendor or .model or whatever? The good news is you can with something called a named tuple. A named tuple basically just takes a tuple and assigns these names to the particular item 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Therefore, from that point forward, I can make my code much more readable both for me and for anybody else who comes along afterwards. So, named tuples, very much easier to use and to understand. Week 20 is about yet another data type in Python called the set. A set is like a dictionary in that it uses curly braces. Inside, though, it only has one value separated by commas, as you see here. It's like a dictionary with only the keys. A set is mutable, meaning it can be changed, but it cannot have any duplicates in it. In this example, I am using one set for available IPs, another for used IPs. Whenever somebody enters the IP address to be allocated, then it changes the items in the available versus the unavailable. That is an example of sets. Week 21, we begin to talk about JSON. Actually, we're beginning to talk about file formats, which really aren't file formats so much as data representation. We'll be talking about JSON, YAML, XML, and CSV. As you can see, JSON shares many things in common with Python, including square brackets for arrays, which are called lists in Python, and curly brackets for objects, which are called dictionaries in Python. In order to take data, which is in the format of JSON, and put it into Python data structures, you use load S. In order to take it from Python data structures and put it into JSON format, you use dump S. In the example that I give, we take data that is in Python format, write it out in JSON, read it in from JSON, convert it again, and then compare the two to make sure that they are equal. In week 22, we talk about YAML. YAML has data structures that are similar to Python, but they're represented quite differently. Here you see dashes, which are arrays, and that's the same as a Python list. And when you see things with a colon and a key on the left and a value on the right, that's just a key value pair in YAML, and we call that a dictionary in Python. If you want to take data that is in YAML format and put it into Python data structures, you use safeload. If you want to take data that's in Python format and write it out to a YAML string, then you use dump. In the example, I do exactly the same thing as we do with JSON, and we'll do in the others, where we take Python data, we write it out, and then we read it back in and convert it back into Python data structures, and we compare the two to make sure that they are equal. In week number 23, our topic is XML. XML, as you can see, is quite a bit more verbose than some of the others and maybe doesn't map quite as clearly to the dictionary and arrays that you have in Python, but there is a library called XML2Dict, which you can use to parse XML data and put it into Python data structure format. And when you want to go back into XML, then you can use unparse. The code that we use in the XML example is going to do exactly the same thing, where we take data, which is in Python format, we write it out into XML format. We're going to then read it back in and convert it, and then compare the two and make sure that they are the same. In week number 24, we take a break from our data description stuff and we go back into intermediate and we look at regular expressions. Regular expressions are patterns that you can create that can be used against strings in order to find particular patterns within the string. We use the RE library in order to do it. In my example, I'm going through checking for valid MAC address, IP address, hostname, and email addresses. The function that you call is re.search, and you pass in the pattern that you're attempting to use to validate, and you're looking at the input and you are figuring out if it's in there. And that's what regular expressions are all about. In week number 25, we're back looking at data representations, and we're looking at CSV. Now, CSV stands for comma separated value. It looks something like this. You can translate CSV into a list of lists in Python or a list of dictionaries if, as you see here, the first item in the first row is going to be the actual title that will then be used down here. In the code, I do exactly the same thing that we did before where we read it in. Now the functions that you use are going to feel different than they did for JSON and YAML especially, but it is doing effectively the same thing where we're taking Python data, writing it out, reading it back in, and then doing a comparison. Just for fun, I ended up adding some extra stuff that I got from a spreadsheet that I created and showed that you can do the same thing. And I also demonstrate turning what we get into a list of dictionary items. In week 26, we begin our discussion of doing networking in Python. I start by talking about NetMiko. In this picture, you can see that you get different levels of abstraction depending on the library and the package that you use. With NetMiko, one of the things we'll be doing is connecting, which you can see we are doing here. The code that I wrote to do NetMiko stuff does two things. The first thing that it does is it cycles through the different devices, and it does send command for show running config, as well as for other commands that I have stored here depending on the operating system. And we do all of these individual commands depending on the operating system type. Then we go through and we cycle through all of the commands, just a different loop doing exactly the same thing, but we do the send command for the iOS command version and the NXOS command version. Lastly, I take the version that I got, the OS version, and I do a regular expression search to return the values that you see. And down here at the bottom, you can see that I've parsed them out, and here's the rest of the output. In week number 27, we took a step out of networking to go back and cover something on the software development process that you see here. We had some slides that talked about the difference between Agile and Waterfall, some of the keywords that you'll bump into: Agile, backlog, sprint, branches, GitHub, Jira, CI/CD. We talk a little bit about what each of these mean. We did go into a little bit about Git and some commands that you will typically do when you're doing normal stuff. You may be creating a branch and beginning to develop your own software, and then eventually you would be merging that back into the main line or whatever it might be. So we did show that a little bit in the terminal. We did show something like this where I'm looking at Git status, and that was an introduction to the software development process. In week number 28, we resume our discussion of networking. We're looking at Napalm. In the picture, you can see that Napalm provides a better level of abstraction. You don't have to worry, in theory, about command differences, output differences, because Napalm handles that for you no matter whether you're talking to various different types of Cisco devices or even other vendors. So we have some code that does that for us. We connect to the device by getting a network driver and then getting our Napalm device, and then we can call things like get facts, get interfaces, get VLANs, get SNMP information, etc. And Napalm translates the data appropriately as well as gets it from all the different devices. Some things that you may notice is sometimes things are not implemented on particular devices, so you get errors or exceptions, and sometimes we're at the mercy of the tool and errors do occur. But in general, way better and easier to be able to reference things in this manner. In week number 29, we have another lesson on Napalm, this one looking at compare configuration capabilities. That is the ability of Napalm to take an existing configuration and compare it against one that you have saved and see if they are the same. So in this situation in our code, we go ahead and get the data and then we write it out, and then we go and do a replacement. We do a load replace candidate and compare configuration, and the output is supposedly showing us the difference between the two. Here you can see in our NXOS device, there was no diff output. In our iOS device, even though I had just saved it, the banner and some of this other stuff with Control-C comes out looking different, but that's just how the tool works. But that is compare configuration with Napalm. For week number 30, there are actually 3 different videos, and they are all reviews. They're reviews of all of the lessons in Basic, all of the lessons in Intermediate, and all of the lessons in Files. These are there so that those of you who are learning Python will be able to solidify what you've learned. If you're interested, you definitely need to go check those out and review what you have learned. In week number 31, we talked about Scapy. Scapy is a tool that allows you to sniff as well as inject packets into the network. We have many examples of sniffing packets. You can wait till all the packets arrive. You can handle them one at a time. You can do it any way that you want. You can also inject packets into the network to perform certain functions, one of them being discovery of hosts in the network. So there are multiple ways to do that. When we get into a later part of the product where we actually implement Quokka, we will see that we can use this type of discovery to discover the hosts in our network. Lastly, there are scanning capabilities in Scapy as well, and so we demonstrated that. So Scapy, very useful tool for doing networking stuff. In week number 32, we discussed Nmap. Nmap allows us to scan for open ports on the network. We can look at that, and there are many examples that we did here to find open TCP, UDP, and IP ports in the network. You can also scan for open ports from multiple hosts if you want to use that to try to discover nodes in the network. We have used it primarily in the mini Quokka that we built to show open ports, so querying every device in the network to find out which ports are open and potentially vulnerable. So Nmap, extremely useful tool. You'll find an Nmap addendum that was primarily an extra intermediate to advanced level discussion of a way that certain things are done with Nmap, and if you're newer, you don't have to worry about it. If you're more advanced, you might be interested. In week number 33, we talk about NC Client, which is the tool that we use to get netconf data from devices. Now, netconf is an entire year's worth of learning in and of itself, but there are ways to get at the entire configuration. When you get the entire configuration, you can then begin to parse it and get different items out of it, and that is fairly straightforward. If, however, you want to get specific items, then you need to understand this namespace information to get various things, and it becomes a lot more complicated. What I did find was that it's possible to use XML to dict, which will allow you to take XML data and parse it into Python data structures, which are then much easier to parse than XML. That's the way I did it in the end anyway. Week 34 is on PyShark. PyShark is a Python wrapper around packet capture capabilities on your system. You can capture packets, all of them. You can capture just certain ones by applying a filter. You can wait until all the packets are received, or you can specify a function to get called as packets arrive. You can apply Lambda functions. You can sniff continuously, which allows you to continue sniffing and calling this function again as packets arrive. And this BPF filter can be any of the filters that you're probably familiar with. The one that I showed you here is an example of one such filter. Week 35 began a 3-week sequence of lessons on the topic of object-oriented programming. The first week, week 35, was mainly conceptual and involved slides and discussion. We talked about how traditional code has data and code separated, but with object-oriented programming, you have these things called objects, which each have their own data and their own code. Why do we do this? There are many advantages. The real world is made up of stuff like this. Encapsulation allows you to hide nasty details. Inheritance, there can be types of things like different types of devices, and polymorphism allows you to have the same command but the result will depend on the type of object. In the real world, you will have usually a mix of normal, traditional programming styles along with some objects, and we've already done that. You just haven't been using it that much. How do you define these things? You define a class, which is the definition of what will become an object, by using the class keyword and defining the data as well as the methods. Those are functions to use, and you create them by using the name of the class and then passing in parameters that will be used to initiate an instance of that object. In week number 36, we defined a device. Here you can see my definition of a class called device. You can see that I have data associated with that device, and then I have methods, which are just functions inside the device to set credentials, connect, get facts, etc. That's my definition of device. The way that I then use it becomes very easy because my application only needs to create the devices, which are done here, as we saw before, creating device using the name of the class, passing in parameters, and then all we need to do is do a connect or get facts. It doesn't matter what type of device it is. You can see these are all different types of devices. The application just says get facts, and the device itself, the device object, takes care of the nasty business of how to actually get that information. That, in a nutshell, is how we use objects and classes. In week number 37, we improve our implementation of device by using inheritance. Notice the device functionality in code is much simpler because we're not actually implementing and having if statements for every connect, but rather we're defining different types of devices. Our Napalm device is going to inherit from device. We have an NC client device and a NetMiko device that all inherit from device. So they inherit characteristics from device, but they implement their own version of connect, their own version of get facts, etc. And so this makes it way easier. Notice in Devices app, this is the new version. Devices app looks exactly the same. It did not have to change. It's just our implementation used the superclass of device, and then Napalm device inherited from device, as did NC client device and NetMiko device. That's inheritance in object-oriented programming. Week 38 is the first of 4 lessons on Flask. In it, we talk about an overview, and we have a small implementation of host discovery, monitoring, and display. Our application, our Flask application, is going to be running inside the Flask web application server. It sits here and listens for requests to come in and responds depending on whether they're get, post, put, or delete. The monitor function will go out and do discovery when it needs to do discovery, and then it will get hosts from Flask, and for every host it will ping it, it will update it, and then it will go to sleep for a while, and it continues in this loop forever. The display wakes itself up periodically and reads the hosts from the Flask server, and then it prints them out in something that looks like this. This is a more advanced version of it, but that's the basic idea, but only for hosts. So this is what our initial host functionality implementation in Flask is doing. In week number 39, we added scanning capability to our host monitor. So basically, periodically, we will go out and scan the hosts to see what ports are open to get information such as you see here, and we modified display appropriately. We also implemented something a little bit different, which we don't end up using later on, but we added a couple of endpoints, one for getting inventory, and that would be reading stuff from a file and then storing it, and then we also added capabilities that would go out and get interface counters from an actual device. And so both of those were examples of things that you could do within your Flask application. In week number 40, all we did was we added device and service monitoring and device and service display. I say only. It was a fair amount of code, and we walked through it, but it's fairly straightforward in what it does because it mirrors in similarity what host monitor, host display had already done. The one thing of interest to note that may be useful is to mention that the service monitor was actually implemented in an object-oriented manner. And so we have service monitor as a base class, and we have HTTP monitor that inherits from service monitor, DNS monitor that inherits from service monitor, etc. All the users of this have to do is call get status, and this particular HTTP one knows how to get status for HTTP. This DNS monitor knows how to get status for DNS. This one down here, NTP monitor, when you call get status, it gets status for NTP, etc. So that is a little bit of object-orientedness thrown into the mix. In week number 41, we talked about Flask usage in Quokka, and we did walk through a fair amount of code, but the main thing that I want you to take away from that is the different ways that we used Flask in Quokka, the project, versus our 52 weeks of Python Quokka that we're beginning to develop. In the one that we're beginning to develop, it's a very lightweight implementation. We eventually will be adding database to it, but there's not a lot in there. In the Flask implementation in the Quokka project, I actually implemented all of this monitoring stuff that you see out here within Flask as separate threads. So that's the main difference between the two, and we did spend some time just walking through the code and seeing how we did Flask usage inside the Quokka project. Week 42 is the first of 3 lessons on the topic of databases. What are we talking about with databases? We're talking about moving this stuff in global variables out to something like a database, which is going to be way safer. It scales better, has better performance. It handles concurrency like we're concerned about. With respect to what we're doing in Flask, there's a couple of types of databases. SQL is structured and everything is predefined. NoSQL is not structured, it's flexible. It uses JSON to define the data in the fields. I then have some code that creates a class called device, which inherits from db.model. That's SQL Alchemy. I then open it up and write data to the table. I commit data. If I want to get just something, then I do filters, and I can delete things from the table as well. That's a really quick overview of databases. In week 43, I refactor the Quokka server to use a database. The way that I do it in Quokka server, I set up the database initially and create it using classes that I have created. Once I've done that, I'm able to call these DB API functions that shield my code here from all the database details. When we look down at what this code does, it actually makes database queries directly, whether it's getting data or whether it is setting data and then committing it. And it's the same for hosts and for services as well as for devices. And that's simply how I do it. Oh yeah, the DB classes, that is where I define my device table, which is a class, host, same thing, and services. Now there's way more fields here than we actually use, and in subsequent iterations of our mini Quokka, I will shrink everything down to be much more manageable. In week number 44, we migrated our database or refactored it from SQL into a NoSQL database using Mongo. The way that we did that, we defined our connection to the database is going to be a little bit different, but if you'll notice, this call right here and this call right here are exactly the same. That's because we use DB APIs and I didn't have to modify that. The APIs themselves are going to be different because they're dealing with Mongo database. The syntax is going to be different, but you'll notice what's missing that was there before is there's no class definitions that define the tables. That's because, if you recall, NoSQL is non-structured. There's not a predefined schema, tables, or columns. It's very flexible, so it just creates things on the fly as you need them, which makes it way easier for migrating in the future if you do make a database change. So this is the version that does exactly the same thing as before. It just does it using the Mongo database. Week 45 is the first of 3 weeks of a discussion on concurrency. We talk about how we don't want to do things on a single thread that takes forever, but rather we want to do things all at the same time. We talk about the different options that you have. You can use threads, which are really good for I/O bound, which would be like networking concurrency. You can use a thread pool, which is the same as using threads, but it limits the number of threads consumed. You can do async IO, which is also concurrent, but it's more complicated, but it only uses a single thread. This is a picture of async IO, which the general idea we mentioned, it does require support by the underlying packages, and that's one reason that it's not universally implemented. The global interpreter lock is important, and it limits what Python can do with respect to concurrency. One workaround for that is to use multiprocessing, where there's no issue with the global interpreter lock, but it does require more overhead because they're separate processes. You do probably want to know about the difference between concurrency and parallelism. Concurrency is dealing with a lot of things at once. Parallelism is doing a lot of things at once, and some are more suited to Python than others. And lastly, perils of concurrency would be multiple threads trying to access the same data at the same time, maybe writing it, and there are issues with that. In week 46, we look at code that uses threads and code that uses a thread pool. The ping host functionality for threads is exactly the same as it was before. The difference is that I create a thread and point it at that code. Once I've created a thread, I will then start the thread and it will begin to run. I need to keep track of the threads because I need to wait for them, and that's what this join function does. And doing this on my network, it takes 33 seconds to do all of my pinging of all of my hosts with sequentially. It takes 3 seconds to do it concurrently using threads. A thread pool is effectively the same. The difference is I use this thing called a thread pool executor. I tell it the number of workers, and all I need to do is invoke the executor.map functionality. I point at the function ping host, and I pass in a list of the things that I want to do, and it calls those in turn. The nice thing about this, if I had 10,000 workers, then my thread pool size of 100, let's say, it would only use 100 threads because they are a limited resource. So in a situation like that, you definitely want to use a thread pool executor. In week number 47, we're doing async IO. The way that we do it is we define our functions to be async. I have a new function here. It needs to use async IO supporting functionality, which this ping does in this situation. I need to use the await keyword in order to tell Python that we are doing async IO. When I am going to be starting this process going, I create a list which is going to be pointing at my function with the value that I'm going to be passing in here, all of the hosts to ping. I use a gather functionality, and that causes the async IOs to happen. Once again, in my little network, it's about 10 times faster than if I did it sequentially. That is async IO. The other thing that I do in this lesson is I take all of my functionality for monitoring in Quokka, and I change it all to use threads. Basically, I'm using thread pools in my device monitor, host monitor, and service monitor. So you can take a look at that. In all, it required me to change just a couple of lines in every function, and it took me less than 10 minutes to change all of my sequential monitoring to use thread pools. So that was very effective. In week number 48, we begin to talk about how you can move from something like this into something like this. And we remind ourselves that in our solution, there are actually two web servers. One is the Quokka server, which has our REST API. The other is the actual thing that is serving up the pages that we're looking at right here. The data comes from Quokka, and the page comes from that other component, which is living over there. We talk about how it's using React and Material UI, and there's code, there's pages that'll help you get started with a Create React app. You will need to make sure that you have installed appropriate software. So on my wiki page for Quokka, I talk about installing Node.js, NPM, and then down here there's a number of things within the NPM world that need to be installed. I look also at IDEs. You'll need to have an IDE, or you'll want to have an IDE that's good for JavaScript. So here you're looking at the code for the hosts, which is a component of our application, our user interface, and we begin to talk about that in the next lesson. Week number 49 is a code walkthrough of the code that implements the page that you see. As you can see from all this stuff that we are pulling in and importing, some of it is React, some of it is from Material UI, which is the look and feel library that we are using. We define a class, and there's going to be a constructor. I have a countdown timer, as you will have seen. There's functionality here called fetch host, which goes out and retrieves the host for this host screen. It's an asynchronous function, so it's going to go and make the request, and when the request is satisfied, in other words, when we get a response, then we get the JSON back. So this is an interesting type of software right here. You can see port scan stuff. That's because this actually has the implementation of port scan, which I did after this. Here's the render function, which is what gets called when we're going to paint the screen. And what you will end up seeing in here is a combination of HTML that you see with these angle brackets and tags and things of that nature, combined with some of this other stuff, which is JavaScript or JavaScript-like, which provides the actual information that's going to be put into the table. Here you see I'm using material table and passing in these particular values, and it's referencing variables that I have defined. And that is a very, very quick description of the user interface code. In week number 50, we begin a 3-week series on messaging. The idea is that the user will request a traceroute or a port scan. We will send a message to the message broker, which is RabbitMQ. Our worker will be listening for messages. When it receives one, it will launch a thread for the appropriate purpose. When that thread has completed its work, it will send a message back to our Quokka server with the data, and that data will get sent to the database, and the user interface, which is waiting for that data to arrive, will then get the information and present it in the screen. Now, how does that work? In the Quokka server, the same thing that responded to hosts and devices and services that we've been looking at for a long time. There will be a new endpoint called scan. That scan will actually have two different request possibilities. One will be a post, which is when the port scan gets initiated, and then get will be what ends up waiting for the data to arrive. The start port scan is going to go and establish a connection with the message broker, and it will publish a request that goes out to the broker. When the user interface comes and says, I want to get that data, we will then go out and we will actually sit in this loop, and we will try to find the data in the database. And if it's not there, we'll sleep for a while and then continue. And if it is there, we will respond with the appropriate data. In week number 51, we talk about the message consumer, which in our situation is the Quokka worker. The Quokka worker will establish a connection with the queue, and it will wait. It will try to consume messages, and as soon as a message is received, it will go and do this receive work request, which eventually is going to be processing the work request. The work request will request either a capture or a port scan or a traceroute, and it will create the appropriate thread, and then it will start the thread. These port scan and traceroute threads are basically the same as the stuff that was in Quokka. There's not a whole lot to go through that's different here, but in our situation, we're using Nmap, where we're looking at port scan and doing a scan of the device, and then we will process the scan, which will eventually send the data back, as we saw, to the Quokka server, and that data will then get put in the database, and the user interface will be sitting there waiting for that information to arrive. In week number 52, we're going to be looking at the code that has to change in the user interface in order to initiate and receive the port scan or traceroute result. So how do we get a button here? How do we respond to it? How do we put up a dialog box? How do we make that happen? So basically the code, I'm here in the host code. In order to create that button, I needed to add actions to the table. This is my material table, and this is the action. Basically, I'm going to call render extended port scan dialog. That is going to come here, and it's going to initiate the extended port scan. This is a two-step process for the port scan. The first step is to initiate the extended port scan, and once that is complete, then what I'm going to do down here in this asynchronous functionality is I'm going to fetch the results, and the fetch results is another request into the Quokka server, and that is where we were looking at the code and we saw that it waited until the code actually was returned in the database that we were looking for. So that's the user interface, how we initiate the port scan or trace route and how we get the results. Well, that's it. Normally at this point I would review what we talked about, but what we talked about was itself a review, and I'm not sure how to review a review. So I just want to pause for a minute, say thank you for spending all the time that you have going through all of these lessons. I do hope that it has been useful to you and beneficial, and that you've grown professionally and in your skills with respect to software development, Python, etc. So it's been a pleasure for me. I've enjoyed every one of these lessons, getting to write code, getting to talk about what I wrote. So thanks for being along for the ride. And yeah, I guess until we meet again in some way, shape, or form, take care, and I'll talk to you later.